The battle cruiser Vigilant drifted through the debris field like a predator surveying its kills. Twisted metal and frozen bodies floated past the observation windows, the remains of what had been the Korathi fleet's 3rd Strike Division. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the bridge window, watching the destruction with tired eyes. She had not slept in 42 hours. "Commander," Lieutenant Park called from his station, "we're picking up distress signals, multiple sources." Chen turned from the window. Her uniform was wrinkled, and there was a coffee stain on her left sleeve that she had not noticed. Identification. "Korathi, ma'am. At least 4 escape pods. They're drifting toward the asteroid field." The bridge went quiet. Every officer present knew what that meant. The asteroid field was a death trap. Its rocks moved in chaotic patterns, pulled by the gravity of 3 nearby moons. Any ship or pod that entered would be crushed within hours. First Officer Martinez stepped closer to Chen. He kept his voice low. "Commander, they're enemy combatants. Our orders are to secure the sector and move on. Fleet Command said nothing about rescue operations." "I know what our orders say, David. Those pods will be destroyed by the asteroids. It's not our problem." Chen looked at him. Martinez was a good officer. He followed rules and protocols. He kept the ship running smoothly. But there were moments when following rules meant becoming something she did not want to be. "How many life signs?" she asked Park. The lieutenant checked his readings. 73 confirmed, could be more. Some pods have damaged sensors. 73 Korathi soldiers. The same soldiers who had been trying to kill Chen and her crew just 6 hours ago. The same soldiers whose fleet had destroyed the colony on Helios IV, killing 12,000 human civilians. The same soldiers who called humans the plague species and wanted them removed from the galaxy. Chen walked to the tactical display. The hologram showed the positions of the escape pods, small green dots drifting toward the red zone that marked the asteroid field. At their current speed, they would enter the field in approximately 90 minutes. "Lieutenant Park, calculate an intercept course." Martinez's eyes widened. "Commander, you can't be serious." "I'm always serious, David, you know that." "Those are Korathi. They wouldn't rescue us if our positions were reversed. They'd watch us die and celebrate." "Probably," Chen agreed, "but we're not Korathi." She moved to her command chair and sat down. The leather was worn from years of use. She had commanded the Vigilant for 7 years now, through 3 major conflicts and dozens of smaller engagements. The ship felt like an extension of her own body. "All hands, this is the commander," she said into the ship-wide communication system. "We're initiating a rescue operation for enemy survivors. I know some of you won't like this. I know many of you have lost friends and family to the Korathi, but we will not let 73 beings die when we have the power to save them. That's not who we are. That's not what humanity stands for. Prepare for recovery operations. Chen out." She closed the channel and looked at Martinez. "Get the medical bay ready. Tell Dr. Yamamoto to expect casualties." Martinez stood frozen for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes, Commander." He walked toward the lift, his shoulders stiff with disapproval. Chen understood his feelings. She shared some of them. The Korathi had taken much from humanity in the 15 years since first contact. The war had cost millions of lives on both sides. There were no clean hands in this conflict. But there was a line that Chen would not cross. Leaving people to die when she could save them was on the wrong side of that line. "Course plotted, Commander," Park reported. "We can reach the first pod in 22 minutes. Do at full speed." The Vigilant turned toward the drifting pods. Its engines lit up the darkness of space as it accelerated. In the escape pod designated Korathi Survival Unit 7, Subcommander Vrethkan pressed himself against the cold metal wall and tried to control his breathing. The pod was designed for 20 occupants. It currently held 31. The Korathi were a reptilian species. They stood nearly 7 feet tall on average, with scaled skin that ranged from dark green to almost black. Their eyes were adapted for low-light conditions, which made them excellent night fighters. Their society was built on strict hierarchies and absolute obedience to superiors. Vreth was the highest-ranking survivor in this pod. That meant the others looked to him for guidance. That meant he had to appear calm and confident even as fear ate at his insides. "Sub-Commander," one of the younger soldiers said. His name was Therx and he was barely past his maturity rituals. "What will happen to us?" Vreth considered lying. It would be the kind thing to do. But Korathi culture valued truth, even painful truth. "We will enter the asteroid field in approximately 100 minutes. The pod's maneuvering thrusters are damaged. We cannot avoid the rocks." Therx absorbed this information. His scales had gone pale, a sign of extreme stress. "We will die." "Yes." The other survivors heard this exchange. Some of them began the death chants of their people. Others sat in silence, accepting their fate. Vreth looked at the small viewport. He could see the asteroids in the distance, tumbling and spinning in their endless dance. He could see the remains of his fleet, broken ships and dead comrades drifting through space, and he could see something else. A human ship, moving toward them. "Sub-Commander," the soldier monitoring the pod's limited sensors called out. "Human vessel approaching. Battle cruiser class. It's the Vigilant." The death chants stopped. Every Korathi in the pod knew that name. The Vigilant had destroyed 6 Korathi ships in the battle. Its commander, the human female called Chen, had outmaneuvered Fleet Admiral Korath himself. She was considered one of the most dangerous human officers in the sector. "They come to finish us," Therx said. His voice had changed. Fear of dying in the asteroids had become fear of a quicker death. "They will kill us all." "Perhaps," Vreth said. He watched the approaching ship grow larger through the viewport. "But why would they waste weapons on pods that are already doomed?" He had no answer to his own question. None of them did. The humans were strange creatures. They were small and soft, without scales or claws. They came from a single planet that was mostly covered in water. By all logic, they should have been easy to conquer. Instead, they had proven to be the most stubborn and unpredictable species the Korathi had ever encountered. The Vigilant came closer. Its weapons remained powered down. Vreth felt something he had not felt in years: hope. Commander Chen stood in the shuttle bay as the first rescue teams prepared to launch. She had chosen to oversee the operation personally. Some of her officers had objected, saying it was too dangerous. She had ignored them. "Remember," she told the assembled teams, "these are enemy soldiers, but right now they're survivors in need of help. Treat them with respect. Keep your weapons ready, but don't point them unless absolutely necessary. We're trying to save lives, not take them." The team leaders nodded. Most of them looked uncertain, but none of them questioned her orders. Chen boarded the lead shuttle herself. Martinez had tried to stop her, arguing that a commander should stay on the bridge. She had reminded him that she was the commander, and she would go where she was needed. The shuttle launched into space, heading for the nearest escape pod. Through the shuttle's windows, Chen could see the asteroid field growing closer. Its rocks were huge, some of them larger than the Vigilant itself. They moved with deceptive slowness, but their mass made them deadly. "Approaching first pod," the pilot announced, "docking in 2 minutes." Chen moved to the airlock. She would be the first one through the door. It was a risk, but it was also a message. She was telling the Korathi that humans did not fear them and that this rescue was genuine. The shuttle connected to the escape pod with a soft clang. Chen waited for the pressure to equalize, then opened the airlock. On the other side, 31 Korathi soldiers stared at her with their large, dark eyes. Some of them looked ready to fight. Others looked confused. One of them, a tall male with darker scales than the rest, stepped forward. "I am Sub-Commander Vrethkan," he said. His voice was deep and raspy, the typical Korathi sound. "Why are you here?" Chen met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here to rescue you." "We are your enemies." "Yes, you are. But you're also living beings in danger, and I have the ability to save you. So that's what I'm going to do." Vrethkan studied her face. Chen did not know what he was looking for, but she held her expression steady. "This is not the Korathi way," he finally said. "No," Chen agreed. "It's the human way. Now, are you going to let me save your lives, or are you going to stand there arguing until the asteroids crush us all?" For a long moment, the escape pod was completely silent. Then Vrethkan made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are a strange creature, Commander Chen." "I get that a lot. Now move. We have 6 more pods to reach." The rescue had begun. The work was hard and dangerous. Each pod required a separate shuttle trip, and the asteroid field was drawing closer with every passing minute. Chen's teams moved as fast as they could, transferring Korathi survivors to the shuttles and then back to the Vigilant. By the time they reached the last pod, they had saved 68 of the 73 survivors. 5 had died from their injuries before rescue could reach them. Chen was in the final shuttle when the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Commander, we have a problem. The last pod is inside the asteroid field." She moved to the cockpit and looked at the display. The pilot was right. The damaged pod had drifted faster than the others. It was now surrounded by slowly moving rocks, any one of which could destroy it. "Can we reach it?" The pilot, a young woman named Kowalski, studied her instruments. "Maybe. It'll be close. One wrong move and we're dead." Chen thought about the beings in that pod. She did not know how many there were. Maybe 5. Maybe 10. Strangers who had been trying to kill her hours ago. "Do it," she said. Kowalski nodded and began the approach. The shuttle entered the asteroid field. Rocks drifted past the windows, some close enough to touch. Kowalski's hands moved constantly over the controls, making tiny adjustments to avoid collision. "Contact in 3 minutes," she announced, "if we're lucky." Chen gripped the back of the pilot's chair and watched the dance of death outside the windows. She thought about her daughter back on Earth, a 9-year-old girl who did not fully understand what her mother did in space. She thought about her ex-husband, who had left because he could not handle the long separations. She thought about all the things she might never see again if this rescue went wrong. But she did not tell Kowalski to turn back. The pod appeared ahead of them, spinning slowly between 2 massive rocks. It was smaller than the others, a short-range escape craft designed for no more than 8 occupants. "Matching rotation," Kowalski said. "This is going to be rough." The shuttle approached the spinning pod. For a terrifying moment, Chen was sure they would collide and be destroyed. Then Kowalski made one final adjustment, and the 2 craft connected with a grinding impact. "Contact seal is holding." Chen was already moving to the airlock. She opened it and stepped through into the damaged pod. Inside, she found 7 Korathi, all badly injured. 3 of them were unconscious. One was clearly dead, its dark blood pooled on the floor. The survivors looked at her with eyes that held no hope. "I'm Commander Chen of the human vessel Vigilant," she said. "We're here to get you out." The conscious Korathi said nothing. They seemed unable to process what was happening. Chen turned to her team. "Get them on the shuttle, now, we're out of time." They worked quickly, carrying the injured aliens to the shuttle. Chen was helping with the last survivor when the pod shuddered violently. "Commander," Kowalski shouted over the intercom. "Asteroid impact in 90 seconds. We need to go." Chen grabbed the injured Korathi and ran. She made it through the airlock just as Kowalski hit the release. The shuttle separated from the pod and accelerated toward open space. Through the rear window, Chen watched the pod she had just left get crushed between 2 colliding asteroids. If they had been 30 seconds slower, they would have died with it. She let out a long breath and sank into a seat. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But 73 lives had become 72 survivors and 5 bodies for proper burial. Under the circumstances, she would call that a victory. The shuttle headed back to the Vigilant. Behind them, the asteroid field continued its eternal, deadly dance. The Vigilant's medical bay had never held so many patients. Dr. Yamamoto and her staff worked without rest, treating the injured Korathi alongside the few wounded humans from the battle. The language barrier made things difficult, but pain and injury needed no translation. Commander Chen stood in the doorway, watching the organized chaos. She had changed into a fresh uniform, but she still had not slept. There would be time for rest later. "Quite a sight," Martinez said, appearing beside her. "Yes, it is. I still think you're crazy." "Probably," she looked at him. "But tell me honestly, David, do you wish I had left them to die?" Martinez was silent for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head. "No, I don't. You did the right thing, Commander. I'm just not sure Fleet Command will see it that way." "Let me worry about Fleet Command." She turned and walked toward the cargo bay, where the healthy Korathi survivors had been placed. Marines stood guard at the entrance, weapons ready. Chen dismissed them with a wave. Inside, 72 Korathi sat or stood in small groups. They fell silent as she entered. Sub-Commander Vrethkan approached her. His scales had regained some of their normal color, a sign that his stress was fading. "Commander Chen," he said formally, "my people wish me to convey their gratitude. You saved our lives when you had no reason to do so." "I had a reason," Chen said. "You were dying, that was reason enough." Vrethkan tilted his head, a Korathi gesture of confusion. "Among my people, enemies are to be destroyed without mercy. It is our way. It has been our way for thousands of years. What you have done today makes no sense to us." Chen considered her response carefully. This moment felt important, like a door opening to possibilities that had not existed before. "Among my people," she said, "we believe that every life has value, even the lives of those who stand against us. We fight when we must, but we don't let people die when we can save them. That's our way. Even if those people would not save you in return." "Yes, even then, because who we are shouldn't depend on who they are. Our choices define us, not theirs." Vrethkan was silent for a long time. Around him, the other Korathi listened intently. Chen could see that her words were causing them to think, to question assumptions they had never questioned before. "Your species is very young," Vrethkan finally said. "You have been in space for less than 200 of your years. The Korathi Empire has existed for 12,000 years. In all that time, we have never encountered a species like yours. Is that good or bad?" "I do not know yet." His dark eyes met hers. "But I believe it may be worth finding out." It was not peace. It was not even the beginning of peace. But it was something. A crack in the wall that separated two species. A moment of connection in the midst of war. Chen nodded slowly. "Maybe it is, Sub-Commander, maybe it is." She turned and left the cargo bay. Behind her, the Korathi began talking among themselves in low voices. She did not understand their language, but she thought she heard something new in their tone. Something that sounded almost like hope. The Vigilant continued on its patrol route, carrying its unusual passengers toward a future that neither species could predict. In her quarters, Commander Chen finally allowed herself to sleep. And for the first time in months, she dreamed of something other than war. News of the rescue spread quickly through both fleets. Human soldiers shared the story with pride, adding details that grew more heroic with each telling. Korathi officers heard rumors and dismissed them as propaganda, but the rumors did not stop. In the Korathi High Command, Fleet Admiral Korath reviewed the reports with growing disbelief. His fleet had been destroyed by the humans, which was humiliating enough. Now he learned that the same humans had rescued his survivors. It made no tactical sense. It made no sense at all. "This must be a trick," he said to his advisors. "They are keeping our soldiers as hostages. They will use them for bargaining." "Perhaps," said Admiral Thurin, one of the few Korathi who had studied human behavior extensively. "But consider the alternative. What if it is not a trick?" "Then what is it?" "I do not know, Fleet Admiral. That is what concerns me." Korath dismissed the concern. He had a war to fight, and he would not waste time trying to understand the irrational behavior of inferior species. He ordered his remaining forces to regroup and prepare for a counterattack. But the story did not go away. It spread through the ranks of both militaries, reaching soldiers and civilians alike. On the human side, Commander Chen became something of a legend. On the Korathi side, the rescue became a puzzle that many could not stop thinking about. Sub-Commander Vreth Khan and the other survivors were eventually transferred to a human prisoner of war facility. They expected harsh treatment, perhaps even torture. What they found surprised them. The facility was clean and well-maintained. The prisoners received adequate food, medical care, and exercise time. They were allowed to practice their religious rituals and maintain contact with each other. Guards treated them with professional respect. It was nothing like the Korathi prisoner facilities, where captured enemies were often worked to death or used for medical experiments. Vreth Khan spent his first week in the facility waiting for the other shoe to drop, as humans might say, waiting for the kindness to end and the cruelty to begin. It never did. On the 8th day, a human officer came to speak with him. She was a colonel named Williams, and she was responsible for the facility. "Sub-Commander," she said, sitting across from him in the interview room, "I've read the reports about your rescue. Commander Chen speaks highly of you." Vreth Khan did not know how to respond. "She is an unusual human." "Not as unusual as you might think." Williams smiled slightly. "Tell me, Sub-Commander, what do you know about human history?" "Very little. We have not studied your species extensively." "Then let me share something with you. For most of our history, humans have been at war with each other. We fought over land, resources, religion, ideas, pride. We were very good at killing each other." Vreth Khan nodded. This matched what the Korathi knew about humans, a violent species from a violent world. "But something changed," Williams continued. "Over time, we developed rules, laws of war, agreements about how to treat prisoners, how to protect civilians, how to limit suffering even in the midst of conflict. We didn't always follow these rules, but we tried, and the trying made us better." "Why? What purpose does it serve?" "Because we realize something important. Wars end. Enemies become allies. The people you fight today might be the people you need tomorrow. If you treat them well during the war, peace becomes possible afterward. If you treat them with cruelty, the hatred never ends." Vreth Khan considered this. It was a strange philosophy, very different from the Korathi approach, but he could not deny its logic. "Commander Chen rescued us because of these rules." "Partly, but mostly because she believes in them. To her, letting people die when you can save them is wrong, period. It doesn't matter who they are or what they've done. Life matters. Even enemy life. All life." Vreth Khan sat in silence, processing this information. He had been raised to believe that humans were primitive and dangerous, worthy only of extermination. Now he was learning that they might be something far more complex. "I would like to learn more about these rules," he finally said. Colonel Williams smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The weeks that followed changed Vreth Khan in ways he could not have predicted. He studied human history, philosophy, and culture. He read about their wars and their peace treaties, their atrocities and their acts of mercy. He learned about concepts like compassion, forgiveness, and redemption. Not all of it made sense to him. Much of it seemed weak and foolish by Korathi standards, but some of it struck a chord deep inside him. He thought about his own people. The Korathi were proud and strong, but they were also rigid and unforgiving. Their society did not allow for second chances. Failure meant death or disgrace. There was no room for mercy. Was that strength or was it blindness? Other Korathi prisoners had similar experiences. Some rejected everything they learned, clinging to their old beliefs. But many began to question, to wonder, to consider possibilities they had never imagined. Word of these changes filtered back to the Korathi Empire through various channels. Some dismissed it as human manipulation. Others worried that their captured soldiers were being corrupted. But a very few, began to wonder if there might be another way. Commander Chen continued her patrol duties, unaware of the ripples her rescue had created. She received a formal reprimand from Fleet Command for unauthorized use of resources. She also received a quiet commendation from the Admiral of the fleet, along with a note that said, "Sometimes doing the right thing is the most strategic thing. Well done." She kept both documents in her quarters, reminders that military life was rarely simple. 6 months after the rescue, she received an unexpected communication. It came through diplomatic channels, encrypted and flagged as urgent. "Commander Chen," the message began, "I am Sub-Commander Vrethkan. You may remember me from the rescue operation. I write to you now because I believe something important is happening and you are part of it." The message was long. Vrethkan described his experiences at the prisoner facility, his studies of human culture, and the changes he had observed in himself and others. He spoke of conversations with Korathi officers who were beginning to question the war. He spoke of a growing movement within the empire that wanted peace instead of continued conflict. "Your people have a saying," he wrote. "You judge a society by how it treats its weakest members. I think this is wisdom, and I think the Korathi have much to learn about this wisdom." He concluded with a simple statement. "I believe peace is possible. I believe it because of what you did that day in the asteroid field. You showed us that strength and mercy can exist together. You showed us that enemies can become something else. I do not know what the future holds, but I wanted you to know that your actions mattered. They still matter." Chen read the message 3 times. Then she sat at her desk and began to write a response. The war continued for 2 more years. Battles were fought, ships were destroyed, lives were lost. But something had shifted. Both sides began to follow more restraint in their tactics. Prisoner exchanges became more common. Atrocities became less frequent. When peace negotiations finally began, Commander Chen was asked to participate. Her rescue of the Korathi survivors had become a symbol, something both sides could point to as evidence that cooperation was possible. Sub-Commander Vrethkan was part of the Korathi delegation. He had risen in rank since his capture, becoming one of the leading voices for reform within the empire. When he saw Chen across the negotiating table, he made the Korathi gesture of respect. She nodded in return. The negotiations were long and difficult. Old hatreds do not disappear easily, but both sides wanted peace badly enough to work for it. On the final day, after the treaty was signed, Vrethkan approached Chen privately. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for saving my life. You just helped end a war. I'd say we're even." "Perhaps," he paused, "there is something I have been meaning to ask you. That day when you entered my escape pod, why did you come in person? You could have sent soldiers. You could have stayed safe on your ship." Chen thought about it. She had asked herself the same question many times. "I came because I needed the Korathi to see a human face," she finally said. "Not a weapon, not an enemy, just a person offering help. I thought that might matter." "It did matter, more than you know." She smiled slightly. "I'm starting to figure that out." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 former enemies who had become something like friends. Around them, diplomats and military officers celebrated the end of the war. A new era was beginning. "What will you do now?" Vrethkan asked. "Go home, I think, see my daughter. She's almost 12 now. I've missed too much of her life." "And after that?" "I don't know, maybe teach at the academy, help train the next generation of officers, try to pass on what I've learned." Vrethkan nodded. "I will do something similar. There are many young Korathi who need to learn what I learned, about mercy, about the value of life, about seeing enemies as people. It won't be easy. Old ideas die hard." "No, it will not be easy, but important things rarely are." Chen extended her hand. Vrethkan looked at it for a moment, then grasped it in the human manner. His scaled hand was cold and rough against her skin, but the grip was firm. "Goodbye, Sub-Commander." "Goodbye, Commander, and thank you for everything." They parted ways. Chen returned to human space, and Vrethkan returned to the Korathi Empire. They would see each other again over the years, at diplomatic functions and ceremonial events. Their friendship became legendary among both species. But the moment that started it all remained simple. A human commander, faced with dying enemies, choosing to save them instead. A small act of mercy that rippled outward until it changed the course of history. Humans called it pack bonding, the instinct to protect and care for others, even those outside one's own group. It was considered a weakness by many species. The Korathi had certainly thought so. They had been wrong. Commander Sarah Chen retired from active duty 5 years after the war ended. She spent the rest of her career training young officers, teaching them about tactics and strategy, but also about ethics and humanity. Her rescue of the Korathi survivors became required study at the academy, an example of how one person's choices could shape events far beyond their immediate scope. She lived to see her daughter graduate from that same academy, following in her mother's footsteps. She lived to see her grandchildren born, children who would grow up in a galaxy where humans and Korathi worked together instead of fighting. When she died, at the age of 83, her funeral was attended by representatives from over a dozen species, including a delegation from the Korathi Empire, led by an elderly Korathi who had once been called Sub-Commander Vrethkan. He spoke at the service, his deep voice carrying across the crowd. "I met Commander Chen on the worst day of my life," he said. "My fleet was destroyed. My comrades were dead. I was drifting towards certain death in an escape pod, and I had accepted my fate. Then she came, a small human female with tired eyes and a stained uniform. She walked into my pod, looked at me, and said she was there to rescue me." He paused, remembering. I did not understand her. Her kindness made no sense to me. Why would an enemy save those who had tried to kill her? Why would she risk her life for strangers who would not have done the same for her? These questions haunted me for years. But I understand now. Commander Chen did not see enemies in that escape pod. She saw living beings in danger, and for her that was enough. It did not matter who we were or what we had done. What mattered was that she could help, and so she did. That is the human way. That is what makes them different from any species we have ever encountered. They form bonds not just with their own kind, but with anyone who shares their experience. They protect the weak, even when the weak are their enemies. They believe truly and deeply that every life has value. Some call this weakness. I call it strength, the greatest strength I have ever witnessed. He bowed his head in the human manner of respect. "Rest well, Commander Chen. Your work is done, and because of you the galaxy is a better place." The funeral ended. The mourners departed, but the story continued, passed from generation to generation, a reminder of what one person could accomplish through simple human decency. Humanity had many qualities that made them formidable. Their creativity, their adaptability, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. But their greatest quality was perhaps the simplest. They cared about people, all people, even their enemies. And that, more than any weapon or technology, was what made them truly dangerous to face in war. Because fighting an enemy who wants to destroy you is one thing. Fighting an enemy who wants to save you is something else entirely. It changes things. It changes everything. Commander Sarah Chen understood this. She proved it with her actions that day in the asteroid field. And because of her, the galaxy learned something important about the strange, soft, small creatures from the watery planet called Earth. They learned that humans were worth knowing, worth respecting, worth having as allies instead of enemies. Pack bonding, the xenobiologists called it. The human ability to form connections with almost anyone or anything. But perhaps there was a simpler word for it. Love. Messy, illogical, dangerous love. The kind that rescued enemies from asteroids. The kind that saw value in every life. The kind that changed the galaxy, one act of mercy at a time. That was the human way. That was what made them special. And that was why, in the end, even their enemies came to admire them. Not for their weapons or their warships, not for their tactics or their technology, but for their hearts. The story of Commander Chen became a standard part of interspecies education throughout the galaxy. Young beings of every species learned about the human concept of mercy, often using the rescue as their primary example. Some species adopted aspects of human ethics into their own cultures. Others studied humans with renewed interest, trying to understand the psychological and social factors that produced such behavior. A few continued to view human compassion as weakness, but they were increasingly in the minority. The Korathi Empire underwent significant changes in the decades after the war. The old guard, with their rigid hierarchies and absolute laws, gradually gave way to a new generation that had learned from human example. Prisoner treatment was reformed. Civilian protections were strengthened. The concept of mercy became integrated into Korathi law. Vreth Khan lived to see many of these changes. He wrote extensively about his experiences, and his books became required reading for young Korathi leaders. He corresponded with Chen throughout her life, and their letters were eventually published as a joint memoir. The title was simple, Enemies. It was translated into over 100 languages and became one of the most influential books in galactic history. Critics called it sentimental. Supporters called it revolutionary. Everyone agreed that it was powerful. One passage was quoted more than any other. It came from Chen's final letter to Vreth Khan, written just weeks before her death. "I have been thinking about that day in the asteroid field," she wrote. "I made a choice that changed both our lives. At the time it seemed simple. You were dying and I could help. What else was there to do? But I have learned that simple choices can have complicated consequences. My decision to rescue you rippled outward in ways I never imagined. It changed how our species viewed each other. It helped end a war. It shaped the galaxy. I do not say this to boast. I say it because I want you to understand something important. We never know the full impact of our choices. The small acts of kindness we perform every day may seem insignificant, but they add up. They shape the world around us. They shape the future. So here is my final advice, old friend. Be kind. Even when it is hard, even when it seems pointless, even when everyone tells you it is foolish, be kind anyway. Because kindness is never wasted, and you never know when a simple act of mercy might change everything. These words were carved on Chen's memorial stone, along with her name, rank, and dates. The memorial stood in a garden on Earth, surrounded by flowers from a dozen worlds. Visitors came from across the galaxy to pay their respects. Among them was a young Korathi cadet named Thurin Vor. He was the great-grandson of Therx, one of the soldiers Chen had rescued from that first escape pod. Family legend held that Therx had been changed by the experience, becoming one of the first advocates for peace within the Empire. Thurin Vor stood before the memorial and read the carved words. He thought about his great-grandfather's stories, passed down through the generations. Stories about a small human female who walked into a pod full of enemies and offered them life instead of death. He thought about his own choices. The academy he attended was mixed species now, with humans, Korathi, and a dozen other races studying together. He had human friends. He had learned to see past differences, to find common ground. All of it traced back to that moment in the asteroid field. One commander's decision, one act of mercy. "Thank you," he said to the memorial, "for everything." Then he turned and walked away, ready to write his own chapter in the story that Commander Chen had started. The story that was still being written, the story that would never end. Because that was the thing about kindness. It did not stop with one person or one moment. It spread, it grew, it transformed everything it touched. Humanity had given the galaxy many things: technology and art, music and literature, science and philosophy. But their greatest gift was simpler than all of these. They taught the galaxy how to care about strangers, how to see enemies as people, how to choose mercy when cruelty would be easier. They taught the galaxy to love. And the galaxy, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, learned. Years passed, centuries passed, species rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed, wars came and went. But the lesson remained. Be kind, even when it is hard, even when it seems pointless, even when everyone tells you it is foolish. Be kind anyway, because you never know when a simple act of mercy might change everything. Commander Sarah Chen knew this. She proved it, and because of her, the galaxy was never quite the same. Humanity had arrived among the stars as newcomers, seen by many as primitives unworthy of respect. They left as teachers, as examples, as friends. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but because they cared. Because they formed bonds with anyone who crossed their path. Because they rescued enemies from asteroids. Because they were human. And that in the end was enough.